Hi everyone. I'm part of the Advent here I'm Olivia, and I was part of the Advent team this year. I attended Advent twice before, and I confess that I've never really had an acceptable or even clear motivation for attending. This year, before we left home, Miss Priscilla posed a question that I hadn't really considered before, which is, why am I going to Advent? I wasn't really immediately sure. Upon contemplation, I faced the ugly truth. I attended because I craved a spiritual high, because I felt like my best self during Advent, because of the summary tally showing how many kids I brought to Christ, and because I wanted to be praised and I wanted people to pay attention to me. I had made an idol out of myself and also an idol out of the external validation that I get from other people, which feeds my selfishness, envy, and pride. So I was really made aware of these problems during the previous year as I realized that many of my actions were rooted in these sins. After seeing how destructive even small evil-rooted actions were, I prayed for God to replace me with Himself. Coming into Advent, I was in the perfect environment to practice this new mindset. So I quickly learned that the only acceptable and good motivation to do things is all for the glory of God. In Matthew 6:1, Jesus says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven." The chapter goes on to explain that practicing righteousness in secret will be seen by God and rewarded. Week one came very quickly. All of a sudden, we were getting acquainted with the local volunteers, finding the 7-Eleven, and settling into our church accommodations. I had a strong, strangely unsettled feeling as I walked into school on the first day, despite the reassurances of a competent team, a good night's rest, and a good breakfast. I felt the creeping, familiar sense of incompetence, but this year it was joined by a strong sense of imposter syndrome, the feeling that I'm incapable of fulfilling my assignment, and the fear of being found out as a fraud. I was supposed to be the most experienced and most capable in my team, yet I still can't speak Chinese, and I'm nowhere as mature as my close friends seem to think. I was still impatient with my teammates. I was late to devotionals many days. I gossiped and I looked down on people a lot. And as the first day went on, I realized that my fears were unfounded, and more importantly, my priorities had again drifted. I had to remind myself that my assignment is not to be the best teacher or to be the perfect person, like what Emma said, but all I had to do was just glorify God. And as I surrendered all of my worldly responsibilities, I found that all the things I was anxious about were added unto me. I had just enough voice every day and just enough energy, but miraculously not so much that I would be tempted to claim those victories as my work. One of our devotionals was revolving around Matthew 6:31-33. "So do not worry, saying, 'What shall we eat?' or 'What shall we drink?' or 'What shall we wear?' For pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you as well." This week, I felt God showering His love and bountiful grace on our team. We were not only blessed with comfortable and charming accommodations, but our living quarters were situated in a way that team bonding became natural and intuitive. Team members that I did not expect to connect with became close friends. The local volunteers were also very well, at least mine, were gentle and helpful. They really helped some of my students to come out of their comfort zone and also help us to control the class. We made a lot of good memories, like going to the night market with them, and it was just really sad when we had to leave. So during the first week of teaching, I had a conflict with a team member boil over. I had resentment, jealousy, and unresolved disputes that I'd harbored, triggering a confrontation that cemented the end of our once enjoyable relationship. I was confused and distraught, and I realized that I really, really wanted to be reconciled with this teammate. The path forward seemed already determined, and there was nothing that I could do to bridge the growing divide. However, time and time again in my life, I've seen that God can do things that we think are for sure impossible. So I wasn't ready to give up on that friendship. I prayed a lot for that friendship, knowing that it was God's will that we would live in harmony. So during the weekend between the first and second week, the teammate and I apologized to each other and we started fresh. All of a sudden, all that resentment that I thought I could not get rid of, it departed in a second, and our friendship was washed pure. That miracle of reconciliation is one that I will never forget, and one that really reminds me of how God has reconciled us to Him. So, transitioning into the second week, I began to think a lot about the past. Last year, I experienced a moment of grief in that city, and I had basically solo taught a class in Lukang's biggest middle school. But to my despair, the majority of that class chose to not accept Christ. And it took almost a year to realize that the reason I was insulted by it was because of my pride and because I thought that I knew the best for my students, while I really did not. I can't know their futures, but God does. This year, we went back to that same school. Every teacher had to solo teach, ensuring that the whole team would be stretched to our physical limits. However, a series of blessings shielded me from the worst of degrees of exertion. I was given a really competent teaching assistant from the local church who translated everything I said. And since the language barrier is always really hard for me to overcome since I have the Chinese of a 2-year-old, so this year I was assigned to be the team leader for my afternoon class, meaning I was permitted to keep my phone for teaching and transportation purposes for the week. This enabled me to bridge the language barrier and connect with the students one-on-one through the Translate app. What's more, my morning class at the big middle school was a specialized class for art students, which is a great blessing to me since I'm already kind of in that community, so it's easy to connect. My students were very calm, but they were also excitable, making the morning class especially smooth. Last, God blessed me with a lot of sleep. So one time I slept at 9 p.m. and the other time I slept at 8:30. So I was very happy. This is not to say that I didn't face any struggles at all. Despite the amount of rest I was blessed with, it was still a major struggle to wake up in the morning, like at 6, and sustain the same energy throughout the whole day. It was like kind of impossible. But after surrendering the events of the day and the anxieties of tomorrow and the responsibility of the outcomes to God, I noticed a big difference between my teaching this year and my teaching last year. Last year, my heart would be racing and I would be so stressed out about every single detail, even before stepping into class. I thought that I trusted in God's might, but really I placed far too much importance in my role in God's plan. With just a shift in mindset, just thinking all the time about solely glorifying God, then I had subconsciously gotten used to giving the steering wheel to God. And when I would sing, act, lead rally, or teach, I was completely relieved of burden. It was God who replaced me with Himself and led me to glorify Him. At the beginning of the trip, I was so worried that I would not be liked by my teammates. That was a worry that I had carried with me both years in previous Advents. It was only when I left that behind and started chasing God's kingdom and righteousness, devoting myself to His glory, did I find the communion and love from others that I so anxiously craved before. Not to say that chasing and surrendering to God is simply a means to an end. Chasing and surrendering to God provides an unexplainable release from the desires that torture and constrain us. This is because I realized how fulfilling God's love alone is. It's like choosing between a feast and choosing between a bunch of garbage that looks like a feast. And so I am far from having all the answers, but I know that this is a truth that was revealed to me this year. All the things I anxiously desired were irrelevant once I realized that my only task is to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Then all the things that abided with God's will were added unto me. Thank you.